My name is Ben Sanford, S-A-N-F-O-R-D, and I run a training center called the Tribal Edge up in Sequim, Washington, and it's we call it a primal arts training center, which is dealing with all of the essential skills that we need as human beings to be on the planet.
And how did you get involved in that line of work?
Really just I got involved with that line of work by following my passion since I was young. I've always been playing outside and training and stuff since I was pretty young. And, by following the things I was into and just following my heart, I ended up getting involved with a lot of different paths like, fitness, healing, martial arts, survival skills, some of the extreme sports and all this kind of stuff. And just found that over time, I didn't know how, but I knew it all kind of went together. And I just trusted that feeling and began to have a vision of some sort of a training center when I was about 17. And just kept working towards it. And I know my life didn't really look like much for quite a while, according as far as everyone else was concerned. But eventually, these things started to come together. And through training with Tom Brown Jr. over in New Jersey, he's a world famous tracker and author and survival instructor.
So you've done more than just read his book?
Oh yeah. I've trained with him for 15 years. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. I forgot to say that. Yeah, so I first got his book when I was 14, and that inspired me to kind of apply some of that philosophy and try some stuff out. He has some field guides and things, but then when I was 22 or 23, somewhere in there, I went to a school back east in New Jersey, and it blew my mind. It was a huge opening, and so I knew that was part of my path, and spent. Well, I still go over there a couple times a year, to train and to help in some cases, and so it just really got opened up to this whole vast and ancient philosophy of living with the earth and the skills that go with that. And so, and then martial arts has been growing steadily. All of these things were just kind of expanding at the same rate, and where they started to cross paths was where I really found the core of my vision, which is integrating these things and bringing them to communities and individuals in a way that's just super enhancing to life in general. So,
why create the center? What prompted you to do
that? I think I created the center. That's a good question, because I could have just trained and done this stuff, right? But I do. I think I have a love for people. I connect with people, and I enjoy sharing stuff. And at first, I was very insecure about that. Actually, very self-conscious about that. But that was part of my journey, is to develop the capacity to share. And so, and most of the sharing, fortunately, in these arts are done. It's an inductive process. It's something where you're drawing people through an experience. You don't even have to teach them, or tell them much. It's like nature does the teaching. We just set up the conditions for it to happen. And part of which is is referred to as coyote teaching by the native people, at least in the lineage of Tom Brown's training.
I guess Tom Brown was instrumental in putting you on that path, which ultimately became the training center.
Yes.
So why don't you, remind me to get back to the question of, because you said something very interesting about nature as its own teacher. I'd like to ask you what you mean by that.
Yeah.
But before that, could you talk about the process of discovering who Tom Brown was and,
Sure.
and actually meeting him and what that experience was like?
Yeah. So yeah, first I read the books when I was 14, right? So, and it didn't really occur to me to to go train with him at that point. Of course, it was almost like it was too far beyond my young imagination. I was just like stoked to find those books, and the stories were like incredible, and I couldn't it just took me a long time to fit all that in my head. And then when I realized, this guy has a school, I should go check this out. I was in my early 20s, and I finally just saved up the money and went. And he teaches a variety of classes, but they all start with what he calls a standard class. It's a week-long immersion in kind of an introduction to all of these skills throughout survival, tracking, and awareness training, and just living with the earth and that philosophy. And so I went over to New Jersey where the training was, and spent that week there, and it just changed my life. It was like coming home. There's a lot of other people there. The standard classes are fairly large, and it's like I had something in common with almost everyone there immediately. It just narrowed my search a lot, So that was a huge influence. And
what was your impression when you first met Mr. Brown?
It was different than I expected. From the books, he seems like kind of the peaceful, nature-loving, teacher guy, and he's a character. He is like, he's kind of like a hick from New Jersey in the Pine Barrens, but he had this growing up, that he had this experience that very few, if anyone, has ever had, and he's like a he's almost like drill sergeant, and a mother hen. He's like super concerned about everyone, but also he's a big personality. But he also has the ability to be very humble and invisible as well. So he's a gifted guy and an incredible teacher. His training, by the way, he was, briefly the story of his training, where this all comes from, was he met a Apache elder when he was about 7 years old, and his name was Stalking Wolf, and Stalking Wolf had basically traveled North and South America studying the old ways for about 60 years of his life, and met Tom when he was in his 80s, and just kind of came out of the woodwork. He was actually connected to Tom's best friend, and so that's how he met this man, Stalking Wolf, that he ended up calling grandfather. That's kind of the name, the title, kind of like teacher in their language, but and he spent 10, almost 11 years with Stalking Wolf, and learning traditionally, like the hard way, the old school way of all of these skills, and going through numerous rites of passages and doing all this stuff, and really learning this stuff for real, just as Stalking Wolf had learned it. And so, that altered Tom and left him in a position of not really being able to identify with his world around him, because when Stalking Wolf left, Tom was about 18, and he was like internally, living in a different world, just in the way he saw the world and the things he noticed and what was important to him. And so he struggled for a while, and he wandered and looked for more teachers, after Stalking Wolf left, for about another 10 years. And eventually was led to his vision, which was finding a way to share what he got from Stalking Wolf, and writing these books, and started a school. And at first he wasn't, he didn't really want to do this stuff, but it ended up happening. So, and since then it's just been huge. I mean, he's really become a huge influence in that whole movement of nature awareness. So that was my introduction, was at the first leg of their school, and he's got over 100 different types of courses, many of them at least a week long. Some of them were weekend intensives and stuff, and he gives you like the tools and methodologies, strategies basically, to go home and work this stuff out and figure it out on your own. And then there's progressions throughout the school, so you can come back and do like a more advanced class based on the previous one. So over the years, just doing numerous trainings with Tom and spending a good deal of my money and time over there, ended up, I guess, arriving at some of the basic understandings of really what he was teaching or is teaching. And by no means is my training over or anything. I really do feel like I'm just starting on this path still. It's just a constant.
Well, you can kind of relate to, imagine how Tom must have felt after Stalking Wolf left, where he no longer could relate to his world ways.
I had a huge period of that.
Huh?
I had a huge period of that.
Well, can you go into more detail about what do you mean by that? I mean, what ways
so
changed you?
I guess the simplest explanation of it is really a lot of this training is what I would just call awareness training. Mm-hmm. And it changes your perspective on everything. It doesn't just change your perspective, it gives you more perspectives. So you still have your original perspective if you want it, but it's going to add to your life in ways that you can see more in life what's going on. And you get to a point where everything in the world, everything in nature, every interaction is becoming a teacher for you. And you can learn from everyone and everything all the time. And that's kind of the heart of the tracker, is to be in this world of observation and unraveling the mystery of life, looking at the stories going around you constantly. So tracking, I think, is probably the easiest analogy for how it makes you feel. You're going through, you realize that you've been living life, for the most part, just a fraction of the surface. There's so much going on. There's so much.
How do you mean that?
I guess it's kind of hard for me to totally remember how I used to be, but it really does happen for most people if you're just paying attention as you get older. Your things change in understanding and meaning, and I guess through training and through like studying tracking and being close to the earth and looking at the earth as a teacher, you're getting a lot of direct lessons, physical metaphors for your life, and let me think here. I gotta frame this somehow. Are you gonna edit this thing?
Yeah, of course.
So, can you say the question again?
I was wondering how you meant exactly how it changes your perspective. You used a word, and I'm trying to remember what that word was. Let me come back to that.
Okay.
Let's talk about the. Sorry.
It's fine. No, it's fine.
What led you to going from your experience with Tom to wanting to start your own training center?
So,
you got a little crack there.
in my teeth?
Right now, I'm going to look here.
All right. Get it?
No.
No.
There.
Still there?
I think so.
Weird. There it is. Blueberry or something.
Because that's kind of that seems like a big headache. Opening up a training center.
Yeah, it's certainly not everyone's calling, and it wasn't even something I wanted to do. It just felt like something I needed to do. It was a calling. It was definitely at a heart level, because I was not interested in speaking in front of people or doing any of that stuff that it would require. That was a super challenging idea, but I guess it's just the nature of being called to do something, or you're having a vision. It's like I just felt almost that I couldn't not do it, and so it's turned out a lot different than I expected. Not a lot different. It's actually way cooler than I expected. So one of the focuses of Tom's is it's not, is really his primary vision is healing and education, and doing that through, of course, addressing people and our needs, but also looking at the planet as a whole and the situations that we're facing environmentally, and being at this real challenging time where, as caretakers of the earth, people as being the ones who can make a difference and choose a different path on this planet, he's trying to help people wake up to that, So,
what's your personal assessment of the consciousness of people?
Of consciousness of people? I think we all have such incredible capacity. I think we're just, for the most part, it's a big generalization, but I think really we're not utilizing that, barely a fraction of that, And I think we're kind of a product of our culture. We're insulating ourselves and separating ourselves more and more from reality. And I mean, I'll just call nature reality. It's a direct reality that shows you what your needs are. It shows you what how natural law works. Cause and effect. It's like there's nothing in between that. Where here in this culture we can kind of set things up in an artificial way that we don't necessarily feel the effects of our actions immediately, whether it's by we just throw more money at it, or we kind of build around it. We're propping up this society around the real needs of our environment and stuff. So it's this kind of artificial setup that we have, I think, removes us. It's kind of both. We obviously stepped away from that, but in the name of progress, or whatever that is, and we're now finding ourselves kind of lost and forgetting how nature works, and that's kind of a big deal, because nature is, we are nature. It's not like you're nature. It's like everything counts. Everything's part of it. So if we think that somehow we're not going to be affected by whatever nature's going through, I think that's a big mistake. But as far as the consciousness of people, I think everyone's desperately feeling this low-grade anxiety inside of the state of, everyone hears the big problems and knows that there's these things we're facing, global warming and, pollution and overpopulation and all these things. And they don't know where to start or what to do about it, so it's better to just kind of not look, or some people are doing whatever they can, so I think education is just one of the broadest ways to address that whole conundrum, and by connecting people, I can within a few hours or a day connect people to the earth in a way that they haven't felt before. And once they're connected once you are connected to something, you can't ignore it in the same way. You can't hurt it in the same way, And so, because you feel like you're actually hurting yourself. And so, especially kids, it's really easy. Within a day, I can have them experience something that's like life-changing, and they will look at their actions in the natural environment and in life in general totally different, more responsibly, more less separation. I think separation is one of the leading causes of the cultural illness we're in. So a lot of our focus is on connection. Connecting between. Well, starting with yourself, looking within and connecting there in the ways that we kind of fragment ourselves and choose to not look at certain parts of ourselves, or just addressing this at the simplest level, body, mind, and spirit. You know, looking at, can we integrate these three things? You know, and that's part of the triangle thing and our tribal edge thing too. So.
Let's talk about tribal edge directly. When imagine you prefer younger kids to start. What's like the ideal age?
Actually, you know, the way we're set up, I personally like working with kind of, what do they call them? Early 20s to adult. That's my favorite. Mostly because I feel like they are understanding what's happening. However, they're the hardest ones to actually cause change with. So they've already got so much going on. Yeah, so many filters and.
So Wesley and Keaton were pretty young for what you.
Well, yeah. So we have a whole range of stuff. You know, overall, we're really trying to address communities as a whole. So that's from babies to elders, you know, and everyone in between. So it's a family thing. Most of our programs or our classes right now are kind of adult oriented, but I let from 12 up come to those classes, like the survival class and all those. And then even younger if a parent wants to come. So we don't mind having kids there, we love it. As far as kid-only programs, I'm still developing them. I had to start with some of the adult stuff to begin with and then work down from there. So.
What are some of the first fundamental basic things a person would expect to learn taking your starter program?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should kind of explain that, you know, we have some experiences like young men's initiation, or initiation in general, trying to build a young women's initiation, and then the Vision Quest, and these are the week-long programs that are going to be truly transformative and life-changing, probably permanently, you know, something that you'll always reflect back on. And then there's the other slice of our school is the day-long programs, and excuse me. And these day-long programs are designed to be an introduction to the various arts, what I call the primal arts, you know, and we have 4 main ones. Tracking and awareness is one, survival is one, healing is another, and then combat is the 4th one. And so those 4 entry points kind of they catch different people, you know. Someone might be interested in more just the awareness stuff or just the primitive skills for survival, or they want more fitness and self-protection stuff, or they're just into healing. And what's cool is initially they'll come in from that direction, and then they'll find themselves kind of pulled into the other ones because they find out they're all connected. They're all very much connected. And so it's kind of all around this hub, this circle of training. And so some of the things that they might expect is to, in every class, we do, there's some sort of like eye-opening to the profound healing there is in connecting with nature. And so, and simple stuff. I mean, like, literally one of the easiest exercises you can do is to find a quiet place. It really doesn't even matter what it looks like or anything, or what environment. I mean, natural environment. But even if you're sitting or going somewhere that, you know, outside your house, but you can angle yourself in a way that you kind of focus on just a natural scene or eliminate as many distractions as you can. That simple process of finding a place like that, going there and sitting and being quiet, it's a simple, you could call it a simple meditation, you know. You're just observing and paying attention to your senses, and doing that once for 5 to 20 minutes a day is the simplest thing you can do, and it teaches you a lot once you learn how to use that. So, and that's called we just call it a sit spot, and that's one of the practices, I mean, that Stalking Wolf taught Tom. I mean, he had Tom and Rick do sit spots every day, twice a day actually, sunrise and sunset. You know, that was their kind of the law of the jungle. You know.
Why is sit spot so important?
The sit area or the sit spot allows you to, say once or twice a day, touch that baseline of what I was calling reality, the natural ebb and flow of life. And if you're receptive, you're not just sitting there in your head and thinking and busy. If you're open, it allows you to kind of reset every day and plug back into reality. So you get to actually get recentered internally, but then reconnected to everything around you. So it's like a lifeline. It's like building a lifeline over time to the source of, physical source of life, nature itself, So by doing that repetitively over time, you're not only, reconnecting every day, but you're also absorbing a lot of information subconsciously about the natural world. You start to notice, like, oh, that's not just a stump over there. That's actually someone's home. A bird crawls out of it, and finally one day, because you've been still enough, and it's sitting there and looking at you, you're like, oh, well, it's a little bird living in there. And then, you start to realize that bird is also part of a bigger web of, oh, okay, so it's got these birds over here that are territorial, and, so it's got this relationship, and there's insects over here, and, oh, that relies on this tree because it drops a certain kind of seed or whatever, and seeing the spider webs. Pretty soon you start to put all this stuff together and start to understand there's this whole, reality going on, this whole show of nature that's so intricate and so connected and so powerful, and that you are part of that, and your actions, your moods even change and influence this little microcosm that you've become part of. So by knowing one place really well, you get insight into every other place in nature. It's like we refer to it kind of as the holographic effect, So by knowing this one place really, really well, if you can tap into the flow of life there, you can really do that anywhere you go. When you go to some other environment, you're going to have almost like immediate access into how that environment works, And that's useful to you on a physical level of just, say in survival, knowing how that environment works is going to keep you alive, because you're going to know where, okay, these are the shelter materials I need, this is where I go for fire materials, this is the edible plants, these are the hazards, these are, that kind of stuff, on a very practical level, but also, man, tracking is a rich subject.
Yeah, there's so many things I'd like to talk to you about. There's two specific things I want to make sure we cover.
Okay.
One in our conversation was, you'd mentioned bringing this to inner city kids. Can you speak about that and why this kind of education training would be
Do you say inner city kids?
Yeah. Kids that just, never...
Yeah.
They see trees in the park, that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, bringing this kind of training to inner city kids, people that have never contacted nature directly, really, other than seeing it almost like a prop, I think that would probably start to re-heal our culture from the inside out, I think if people don't have a reference for nature and how it works, and that we're so much a part of it, we're so much interwoven into this system that even our thoughts and our feelings are of course, our beliefs and our actions are going to influence it, and then in turn it's going to influence us. If they could get some of those experiences, I think we would start to see, especially with kids, they're the future decision makers, right? The world's going to take shape around them. If they have not been patterned around nature at all, we're just going to get further and further removed from the earth, and I think that would be pretty destructive for us. It's already pushing it. So yeah, it would help them on a personal level tremendously, just dealing with everything. There's nothing it doesn't touch. But
how about the X Factor interview? What have they been asking you about?
Mostly it was about the young men's program, and then about Wes and Keaton.
What did they ask you about Wes and Keaton?
Oh, just kind of like what they were like growing up, and how they were kind of looking for uniquenesses between them, like what was their character like. And,
were you with them during the training?
Which training?
That they did with you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was the whole time, 24/7.
How did they respond to being out there with you? What was your...
they were awesome. There's parts of that training, that program, that pushes buttons, and so there's times they didn't want to be there, But for the most part, they really leaned into the experience. They weren't trying to just get through it. They were actually trying to benefit from it. The funny thing is, or unfortunate thing is, not all the kids who get there know why they're there. It's not really been explained to them thoroughly enough, or they haven't been prepared in the right way to make it as powerful as it could be. So hopefully with stuff like this, I can begin to make it more of an understood need that parents can get. And so the family kind of has some knowing of what they're getting into, I do a little preparation for the family, but the kids, they're teenage boys. They're just like, yeah, okay, whatever, So
going through a week-long program, if that's all they did with you, would they be in better shape if somehow in the future they ended up being stuck out in the woods by themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. There'd be just that 1 week, even though really for survival itself, those skills we only spent 1 day on, which is not a lot of training. These are skills like, martial arts or something where you need immersion, you need practice. But because of their facing discomforts and facing themselves and being alone and for a period of time in the woods, and so there's a certain amount of conditioning and facing fears and things that would otherwise probably overwhelm them. Because really, the biggest threat in survival is your mind, your attitude. If you freak out, you're going to probably hurt yourself or end up worse than you started with. So the skills themselves, as far as staying alive, human beings, we're pretty resilient creatures. We can actually go through a lot as long as your mind isn't fighting you.
Well, that's the tricky part.
That's the tricky part, yeah.
How do you get into the other people's minds to help them on that level? Are they pretty much on their own with that?
Well, no, the whole thing is really geared around, it's a very powerful psychological experience, because you're going from whatever your preconceived notions of nature are, and like your fears of wherever your edges are, it might be being alone, might be being cold, might be bugs or whatever, or just cougars or something. We have cougars there. So just not knowing the hazards, not being familiar with the baseline. What we do is they do feel secure to a degree. They don't know what's going to happen next. Everything's, there's no schedule or anything. They're just like, there's a schedule for us, but they're just like constantly having to be ready for everything, which is a really great state for survival training. You need to be in that mindset. You need to be expecting the unexpected. You can't get complacent. You have to be aware and prepared and ready to take action no matter what. And so, and that's just kind of like where you start, And so, we keep them in that state, and they do have a few routines that they figure out, like they have to get up first thing in the morning, way early, and get ready real quick and go and jump in a cold creek and then come back out and get dressed and stuff. And so, they've these certain things they know are coming, but the rest of the day is pretty much wide open, so.
They learn how to, I guess, make shelter or start fire.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yep. So we go through what's called the sacred order of survival, the basic 4 things that you must have down in any environment, which is understanding and being able to build shelter, being able to find and purify water, being able to make fire, and being able to find food and gather food or whatever. So, and those 4 things are kind of the core. You know, of course you need to be able to make tools eventually and do all of that stuff, but you know, if you think about it, in worst case scenario, worst conditions, without shelter, without something that you can protect and warm yourself with, you could be dead in 3 hours, you know. Without water, you can be dead in about 3 days, you know, and that's a long time, depending on how hot it is and how hard you're working. And without food, you know, unfortunately, you can go pretty long because it's one of the hardest ones to cover, but you can go about 3 weeks before your body starts to really run into serious problems. So, so that's part of why that order exists. You know, it's actually shelter, water, fire, food is the way we think of it, depending on the environment. If you're in Hawaii, it's going to be shifted around a little bit because shelter is not such a big issue. So the boys go through this. You know, they get training in each of those areas, and the survival mindset as well. And you know, they're going to have it's just like anything. I mean, if you do it once, you're going to have maybe a chance of doing better. You know, probably better than not knowing at all. But it is a skill, and that's what we try and emphasize. Like, you can't just like go take a self-defense lesson and think you're going to be safe no matter what. You know, you need to test yourself in a lot of different ways over and over, so this stuff is ingrained in you, second nature, deep into your subconscious, so you don't have to think about it. So, same thing. But I also like to point out that everyone's surviving all the time. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. I mean, you're doing it, right? It's just a different form. So we all know how to survive. We just need to know the environment we're in, the conditions we're in. And that's where the sit spot comes in. Yeah.
What's been one of the more rewarding experiences for you since you've opened up the training center? Can you share a personal story? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, there's been many. I think, actually, ironically, this week has been pretty rewarding, just seeing Wesley and Keaton's, the fact that they are still drawing from that experience on a daily level. You know, like, I was really impressed. I did not know that they were that, it had moved them that much, you know. I hear stories from some of the young men that have been through, and some of them say, like, yeah, not a day goes by they don't think about it. You know, they're constantly, you know, comparing their life to that event because they get to see a lot of who they want to be in that week, you know. And so that's a nice, like I said, a reference experience where they can like call back on that and match it. Am I still in line with that, who I want to be? But probably, yeah, I think Young Men's is probably one of the most powerful aspects of what we do, that initiation process. Seeing the boys at the end of the week, even during the week, seeing them process what's going on, letting go of who they were, especially the ones that have had trouble in their life, you know, and then seeing them reunite with their families. And, you know, that's all very beautiful and powerful, but then seeing it stick and seeing it ripple into their life and see them making like healthy, empowering choices that are helping everyone. I don't know, that's pretty awesome to me. There's been so many different things though. I mean, it's all so rewarding. It's what happens when you follow your passions and do what you love, you know. It's just like, it's one nonstop reward and challenge, so.